Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton wants to be the next U.S. Senator from Illinois. Listen to what she has to say. From Capital News, Illinois, it's Friday, May 2nd, and this is Capital Cast. Hello and welcome to Capital Cast, a regular podcast of Capital News, Illinois. Candidates are starting to line up to run for the U.S. Senate seat that will soon be vacated by the retiring Democratic Senator Dick Durbin. One of the first to step forward is Democratic Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton. She has already secured the endorsements of Governor J.B. Pritzker and the current junior senator from Illinois, Tammy Duckworth. This week, she sat down for a one-on-one interview with Capital News Illinois' Ben Solinsky. Here now is that interview.
Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton, thank you for doing this interview with us. So first thing I want to hit on is Senator Durbin. He talked about that you guys did have some conversations before his decision. Tell me about those conversations and what you were telling him and maybe how much that could have influenced his decision to retire.
Well, I don't think anything that I told Senator Durbin, he made a decision of what was best for him, what was best for his family, and I respect that, and I deeply respect him. He's someone who has served our state admirably for decades. He is a true statesman, and he's somebody that, as I started off in elected office, he was very important to kicking off things as I ran for state representative. So I'm just very grateful for his leadership. The conversations that we had, well, I won't go into specifics, was just making sure that he understood what my plans were and how much I respect his leadership.
When did you first approach him?
Well, I think he's always known that if he were to run again for re-election, that I would not run against him, but I let him know that, he's somebody that's been an advisor in so many ways throughout my political career, someone that I've looked to, both he and his wife, Loretta. I was a delegate of the I Will program, the Illinois Women's Institute for Leadership Training Academy. And so they're both people that I looked to for advice as I thought about how I could have the greatest impact as an elected official. So we've had conversations all throughout. And, as he started saying that he was going to make an announcement about what he wanted to do, I wanted to make sure that he understood first and foremost how much not only that I appreciated his leadership, but how much I respected him and that he deserved the time to make his own decision on his own timetable, and that's what he did.
Over these last 6 years, I've thought that Governor Pritzker's done a good job of, making you front and center of big decisions. He's given you a lot of credit for the accomplishments of your administration. Going into this race, though, how are you going to carve your own lane that's not, just under the governor's umbrella, because he ultimately gets a lot of the headlines on it? How are you going to go to voters and say, this is what I've done and this is why you should vote for me?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. First and foremost, I'm proud to earn JB's endorsement. I'm proud to earn Tammy's endorsement. Both of those endorsements from the governor of the state of Illinois and currently our junior senator, but soon to be our senior senator in the United States Senate, are incredibly important as we sort of hit the ground running with this campaign. Look, I've stood by Governor Pritzker's side. He views me as a true partner in governance, and I'm very proud of that. And I think that the people of Illinois right now are focused on the contrast between what we've been able to get done in Illinois and the chaos that's coming out of Washington, D.C. And so I think that as voters and as Illinoisans every day will look at this race, what they will say is, in Washington, D.C., they're trying to take away my health care. In Washington, D.C., they said prices would come down, but they've actually gone up. In Washington, D.C., they're threatening to take away Social Security, and the trade wars that Donald Trump started are impacting me as an everyday Illinoisan and an everyday working family by prices going up, et cetera. And they're also impacting our agricultural communities. So they're going to be looking at all that and saying, well, what did you actually do? And I will be able to turn and say, Governor Pritzker and I, working as a team, were able to lower the cost of groceries. We protected healthcare. We expanded your rights. And we made sure that we stood up for working families of Illinois. Yeah. So I think that's the contrast that they're looking to see. They need people to fight for them in Washington, and that's the kind of leader I'll be in the Senate.
I want to go into some more issues that would actually be part of this race. First, foreign policy is going to be something that you're going to be asked to weigh in on a lot. I think the big thing on a lot of people's mind right now is the Israel-Gaza conflict. Should Israel agree to a ceasefire even without all the hostages returned? And what would you like to see as kind of a long-term solution to that conflict?
Well, I think first and foremost, we have to look at where we are right now. It's true that foreign policy is going to be a critical part of certainly anyone who serves as a United States senator. But I think what's also important is to recognize right now what people want and need is a stable leader in DC. Mm-hmm. Right now with Donald Trump, we don't have that. We don't have someone who is focused on global issues overall and the impact. In fact, he's put many policies into place that really threaten our relationships with so many people, other countries. And so I think right now, what I think is important is to recognize that we need stable leadership in Washington, D.C. We need somebody who's going to stand up against Donald Trump. And whatever the issue is, whether it's foreign policy, whether it's domestic issues, whether it's just protecting the rights that are given to us under the Constitution, we're not going to get that from somebody like Donald Trump. And we need somebody to stand up against him. And then we'll start talking about all of the policy issues that will come from that.
But on this conflict specifically, is there a way you would push the president if you were a senator?
I don't know if I would say right now there's a way that I would push the president on any particular issue. I think right now what I would do is I would stand up against all the things that he is trying to do that impact the working families of Illinois. Look, when I travel the state, what people are talking to me about is that they're worried that they're not going to be able to put food on the table. They're worried that they're not going to be able to get their children educated, including students with disabilities. I'm hearing people talk about what's going to happen if you strip away my health care or my Social Security. And I think those are the kitchen table issues that I am hearing from Illinoisans all across the state. And we need to center those issues and make sure we send somebody like me to Washington, D.C. who will fight for them.
Yeah, that was obviously one of the biggest concerns going into the 2024 race. A lot of people did vote for Donald Trump, believing that he was the best person to address those concerns. Aside from, obviously tariffs has become a big thing that is impacting the cost of living, but aside from eliminating and getting some certainty on this tariff policy, what sort of legislation would you want to push for as a senator that would address some of these cost of living concerns?
Well, I mean, I think look at what we've done here in Illinois. We raised the minimum wage. That has not happened on the federal level yet. And yet people know that raising the minimum wage helps lift people up out of poverty. It helps people to put food on the table and take care of their children and their families. And it can help change the trajectory not only of a family, but of an entire community. So that's one of the things. I mean, I think there's a number of things. Protecting reproductive freedom is something else that we got done here in Illinois. Knowing that Donald Trump's Supreme Court overturned Roe and led to the fact that in all the states across our country, there's all these different rules about just whether or not women can have the decision about what's best for their own bodies and their own futures. But here in Illinois, we enshrined reproductive freedom into state law. So those are the kinds of things that we have actually done. And I think what I'm just seeing is that the old playbook in Washington, D.C. isn't working. People aren't, as I talk to working families across Illinois, they're not looking for people to just talk. They want to see real action. And that's exactly what we've done in our administration. And they want to see somebody there to fight for them to get those things done in D.C. as well.
Yeah, when you talk about that old playbook, we've heard what the governor's had to say a lot about, the way he thinks the party should approach, communicating these issues to voters. What's your take on that? How do you get the message across to voters on both sides of the aisle that Democrats actually do have what it takes to address some of these issues?
I think, first of all, we're seeing people all across Illinois, who are standing up and making their voices heard. I mean, these hands-off protests that are taking place where people are saying, hands off my health care, hands off our democracy, hands off Social Security, hands off our education. They thought that they were going to, I'm talking about in rural communities all across our state, where I've talked to people saying, we thought only a couple of hundred people were going to come out, and there were 2,000 people. I think people are seeing what's happening and how they are being impacted personally, they have a pain point where they may even be having what I think is buyer's remorse about who they voted for. And I think what's important is to recognize that when Donald Trump threatens to take away Medicaid, no one is taking a look at which political party someone is from. They're just going to take away your health care. Or when we see veterans that are being, their jobs and their benefits being slashed, that's something no one could ever imagine, that we would not stand up for the men and women who admirably served our country. When we talk about education and trying to educate your children and, cuts to Title I funding, or, cuts to, IEPs or 504 plan students with disabilities, and cuts to resources to help them, nobody's going to say, who did you vote for? Nobody's going to say, where do you stand on the political spectrum? They're just going to cut those, services and resources. Yeah. And we're seeing people hurting all across our state. And so I think what we have to say is the damage that's being done to Illinoisans by Donald Trump and his unelected billionaire sidekick, Elon Musk, that's going to harm everyone. And you need a fighter who's going to fight for you no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. Remember, I'm the only one that's currently in the race, and even in those that are proposing to be in the race, I'm the only one that has represented all Illinoisans across our state. And that gives me the perspective of, I've traveled the whole state, I've talked to people, and I'm continuing to talk to them. And we need to make sure that their voices are heard. And I think I'm tapped into what matters to Illinoisans. And it's that they just want to see that government is working for them.
To that point, when Senator Durbin was talking with us about his career and his decision to retire, one of the things he said is, I really want to make sure that the next senator remembers downstate. You've been part of a lot of initiatives downstate. You lead the Rural Affairs Council. How, though, some of these things are a little obscure, I think, to a lot of voters. So how do you make it clear that someone from Chicago is able to represent these rural communities and communities outside of Illinois, when potentially, if you win, both senators are going to be from the Chicago area?
I think doing exactly what Senator Durbin said, and in fact have been following an example that he set for me as I set out to be a state representative first back in 2016, and have continued during my time. I mean, people told me at the very beginning, they told the governor and I both, oh, we won't see you anymore. And yet, once you get elected, and yet look what we've done. I mean, we have invested all across our state. We've worked in childcare and preschool deserts all across our state. We've addressed food insecurity all across our state, supported small businesses all across our state. And I'll be able to really talk about the many places that I've been, but also the many places that I'm going to go. Because as kicking off this campaign, this is going to be a campaign where I roll up my sleeves and get to every corner of the state of Illinois and talk to everyday Illinoisans. One of the things that I always think about that's important is just understanding how their struggles are my struggles. I know what it's like to be a working mom of 4 who was also caring for my mom, Velma, who lived with Alzheimer's and struggled with that disease until her death in 2016. And I know what it's like to juggle. I know what it's like to try to, figure out how to make ends meet and to make sure that you're taking care of all the different responsibilities that you have. And my struggle is the struggle of so many Illinoisans who may not be able to pay attention to every policy paper or every piece of legislation that is being pushed forward, but they just need to know that somebody is out there fighting for me, fighting for my family, fighting for my community. And that's the exact kind of leader that I'm going to be. And I think that's why Governor Pritzker, Senator Duckworth both endorsed me, understanding that they've seen me in action. And remember, my career in public service didn't start with Lieutenant Governor. I was a state rep, I was a local school council chair, and before that I've been in public service my entire career. So this is an opportunity to extend it at a time where we are, quite frankly, facing a 5-alarm fire. The chaos that Donald Trump and Elon Musk and congressional Republicans have dragged this country into. And if we don't stand up right now, it's really going to continue to cause so much damage.
What do you think of the filibuster?
What do you mean?
It's been a controversial issue
about whether it should...
For Democrats, yeah. Do you want to keep it? Should it be done away with? Is it... an old rule, I guess, for the Senate?
Well, what I will say is what I've been looking at is what I said before, that we have to make sure that the tactics that are being used right now are actually going to have the impact that we need them to have, which is that we fight for people who every day are counting on their leaders to get there and raise their voices and stand up against the attacks. And that's exactly what I want to do.
Last question for you. If you're elected, what would be the first bill you file?
I don't know. I think that there's so many policy conversations that are happening. I think it's really important to open up access to opportunity for Illinoisans across our state, both economic opportunity as well as educational opportunity. We have to protect health care, and there's so much that I think is important from a policy standpoint, but I'm going to be 100% frank with you. If we don't get in there and stop the damage that is happening right now, we won't even get to a lot of those issues. And I think right now what I am hearing directly from Illinoisans is we want to know that you're going to fight. And I know sometimes people hear that and it sounds very broad, but I do think that this is a moment. I do believe it's why people are getting into the streets and they're raising their voices and they're getting their signs and saying we're going to protest and we're going to mobilize and we're going to organize. And we want to send people to Washington who are not going to go along to get along, but are going to call out Trump's nonsense and the damage and are going to fight for us. So there are going to be lots of things as I continue to listen to Illinoisans that I'm going to want to do. And I don't think anything's more important than making sure that government works for the people and that we are creating opportunity. But how are we going to do any of those things if we don't stand up against somebody who is trying to strip away rights, fundamental freedoms, overlook the rule of law? So we have to, first things first. And I want to get to Washington to be one of those fighters. And then, of course, work with our partners across the state of Illinois to make sure that we get those things done. But we got to fight first.
Lieutenant Governor, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That was Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton talking with Capital News Illinois' Ben Solinsky. And this has been Capital Cast. Capital Cast is a production of Capital News Illinois, a public affairs reporting project of the Illinois Press Foundation with significant funding from the Robert R. McCormick Foundation. Until next time, this is Peter Hancock on behalf of the entire Capital News Illinois team saying thank you for listening.